The official inauguration of Ronald Reagan's second term was the first significant international political event of 1985.
Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
The moment was celebrated outside with a 21-gun salute and inside with the inaugural address on themes of national renewal and of peace.
Today we utter no prayer more fervently than the ancient prayer for peace on earth.
Here in New Zealand, the Waitangi marchers left Auckland and other centres on their long trip to Waitangi to protest against the annual celebrations. In contrast to 1984, the ceremonies passed with only minor incidents. Later in the year, the Labour government announced plans for the ceremony to be moved from Waitangi to Wellington. The 1985 ceremonies were not only the last to be held in the north, they were the last for retiring Governor-General Sir David Beattie.
In 1985, the ANZUS issue and the nuclear ships ban hotted up and became a war of words.
If the ship is nuclear capable, then it won't come, unless we can be assured it does not carry nuclear armaments. Your question, do we have the means to establish that? My answer, no. QED, no, come.
The actions of the Labour government at the moment are jeopardising New Zealand's security.
Well, I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to work this out mutually and to our mutual satisfaction, and that ANZUS will remain an important part of our relationship.
I dare say that we are going to get cool treatment from the Americans for some time.
We deeply regret the decision by the New Zealand government to deny port access to our ships. We consider New Zealand a friend. It's our deepest hope that New Zealand will restore the traditional cooperation that has existed between our two countries.
There were demonstrations in support of the ban.
It's sort of given us some hope for our future.
And there were public campaigns against it, like Dr. Jim Sprott's push for a referendum on the issue.
Bear in mind there's got to be an election in less than 2.5 years from now. And if he ignores massive referendum support like that, he will do so at his peril personally and to his party.
From Australia came support in the form of Senator Don Chipp.
Nowhere in the treaties that say anything about automatic involvement of the United States if New Zealand is attacked.
And there was opposition from Queensland Premier Mr Joe Bjelke-Petersen, who banned out chocolates in revenge.
I wanted to draw attention to it, world attention, Australian attention.
Joe Bjelke-Petersen has declared Queensland a chocolate-free state.
The battle raged on in Parliament. The division bells rang on the first sitting day of the year for a snap debate on ANZUS, and they rang again in the closing days of this session for the same argument as the government finally introduced its legislation banning nuclear ships. It's one argument that's unlikely to go away in 1986.
On the Coromandel on February the 11th, there were more roadblocks and pickets protesting against further mining exploration in their region. It was from this environmental controversy that the government announced plans to establish a Ministry for the Environment and invited submissions from interested parties.
150 people have been invited to share their views on the new ministry, and there were disagreements even before the forum started. The officials' view, set out in a pre-conference paper, has angered the so-called Greenies, who accused the departments of hijacking the environment proposal to preserve their own power.
In the same region, death and widespread damage came to the Thames Valley and Te Aroha in mid-February, when floodwaters breached a dam above the town. It was to cost the lives of 4 people and millions of dollars in property damage. The tremendous force of water and the resulting damage caused civil defence authorities to close the town to all but rescue workers and officials. By March in Britain, the lengthy and often bloody miners' strike had begun to collapse.
From the coalfields had come to London to lobby their leaders, but in their hearts they knew it was a lost cause. Throughout the week, area by area had voted for a return to work, although some had stipulated that the hundreds of miners sacked after being convicted for crimes during the dispute be reinstated. In the end, the delegates voted to go back to work anyway, and it was left to Arthur Scargill to put on a brave face.
The feeling in that conference today is very clear that we go back on Tuesday, we go back together, and as far as we're concerned, this union fights to retain pits, jobs and communities.
In March, the death of Russian leader Shchenko raised new questions about Russian leadership.
Shchenko had ruled over them for 1 year and 1 month. They knew he was ill, and when he made his last appearance a fortnight ago, that was confirmed. Today's medical bulletin spoke of death from heart failure following lung and liver complications.
At home, the first returns of the government's new perks tax just didn't measure up.
By its own admission, the government's tax on fringe benefits is not a financial success. Tax returns are well down on the number expected. Of those companies which did file returns, 88% said they had nothing at all to pay. The government expected the perks tax would raise $200 million this year. It's now chopped that back to $98 million. But despite being $102 million out of pocket, the government remains enthusiastic about its new tax.
This is tax we were not getting at all before, and given to Russell Marshall in education, or Anne Herkis in welfare, or Michael Bassett in health would be very welcome indeed.
At the end of March, the Anglican primate for New Zealand, Archbishop Paul Reeves, was announced as the new Governor-General. This makes Bishop Reeves the first person of Maori descent to hold the office and the first member of the clergy to be appointed. His arrival at Parliament for swearing in was a change from the usual formal proceedings.
Paul and Lady Reeves literally surrounded by their kinsfolk from the Taranaki tribes. These part of the ceremonials must be done just as correctly as the ceremonials which we'll see a little later on this afternoon, which will be enacted in the legislative chamber.
I, Paul Alfred Reeves, swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
It's April, and the government grants nearly $3 million to combat the disease AIDS.
Health Minister Dr. Bassett announced the AIDS package today, partly in response to the news of contaminated blood and the discovery of the AIDS antibody in New Zealand. $1.6 million will be spent on testing every blood donation for the AIDS antibody. Hospital boards will pick up more money for surveillance of at-risk groups and treatment of AIDS sufferers. The remaining money will go to set up a toll-free AIDS hotline, support to the AIDS task force and other groups involved in AIDS counselling. An AIDS trust, too, will probably be set up.
That you're his wife, the mother of his child?
The death from AIDS of film star Rock Hudson later in the year drew fresh international attention to the disease.
Having carefully considered all the relevant factors, the Council has decided to accept the invitation and will advise the South African Rugby Board accordingly. Details of the tour have not yet been negotiated with the South African Rugby Board. A draft itinerary for consideration is awaited, which is the end of the statement, but in fact, to anticipate questions which I'm sure will be asked, could I state that the decision to accept the invitation was passed by a substantial majority.
The announcement to go ahead with the tour caused the expected reaction, with marches in most main centres. In Auckland, an estimated 50,000 people took to the streets, and the rugby union was not the only target for protest.
Wrong for a bank claiming to be the People's Bank to support rugby while rugby supports contact with South Africa.
In Matamata, 60 anti-tour demonstrators were attacked by tour supporters in a backlash against the cancellation of the tour. In the High Court in Wellington, 2 lawyers successfully applied for an injunction to prevent the All Blacks leaving for South Africa, so that legal questions regarding the objectives of the rugby union and the tour could be clarified.
The Council has now decided that it would not be practical to proceed with any tour by the All Blacks of South Africa this year.
To Hobbs. Murray mixed in
as a substitute, the rugby union was quick to organise a tour to Argentina. And in December, after 29 years with the rugby union, Mr. Ces Blasey announced his retirement. He steps down next May.
Victor Simpson-Kerwin, try number 2.
On May the 1st, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and MP for Timaru, Sir Basil Arthur, died in
Prime
Wellington.
Minister and a large party of MPs flew in on a special flight to Timaru this morning. All parties at government and electorate level strongly represented. Such was the popularity and general affection in which Sir Basil was held. The reluctant baronet was how he was described today. A title which he readily accepted was incongruous with his Labour background, but which he could make light of among colleagues or constituents. Timaru under Sir Basil may not have had the highest profile in the country, but the Prime Minister's tribute could leave no one in doubt as to Sir Basil's dedication to his job.
Can I tell you that as a member of a government which needs to take into account the interests of 95 electorates, none had its interest pressed more urgently on government than Timaru.
May Day marches were organised in New Zealand this year for the first time. This traditional Workers' Day hadn't been celebrated this way before in New Zealand. On May the 7th, Jim Knox addressed the annual conference of the Federation of Labour.
We want to retain the Labour government, but they must heed our voice and the cries of those people who need wage increases to sustain their standard of living.
The unions came out of that May conference set on a mission, and that was to restore spending power in the first full wage round after more than half a decade. To a certain extent they succeeded in that, and also in their related cause, which was boosting the lower paid wages. We've seen wage increases of 15.5% up to 18%, and in some cases those lower paid groups got even more than that. But I wonder whether it might not be a case of beware of what you want in case you get it, because in this coming year the government's looking to change the wage fixing system better to suit its own free market policies, and in some cases those changes may not be all the unions want to see. At the same time, they may have less influence. The workers are comfortable, they've got wage increases, and in the past it's always been the case that full bellies mean less union support and certainly fewer strikes.
We've actually got a fire in the stand on the far side of the ground, and that looks very nasty indeed. Now the police have gone over there to try and quell the fire, and they're frantically getting some of the supporters out. Now these are extraordinary scenes at Valley Parade. It's supposed to be a day of celebration. One hopes the stand doesn't burn down. And that is a catastrophic sight for Bradford City Football Club. The whole stand is going up in flames, and that person there looks to be burning. And the timbers are coming down onto the ground, and this is horrific. This was supposed to be a day of utter joy, triumph and celebration. It's turning it into a nightmare. There is a policeman on fire there. He's managed to quell that. A woman being led from the stand, and there are still one or two people, and I must say it is only one or two isolated people in there, but the roof is caving in. And look at that. Oh, the poor man. Oh, this is awful. The police desperately trying to save the life of a supporter. He'd come to watch the football. This is human tragedy.
Another soccer stadium, this one in Brussels, was the scene of further tragedy in May.
The tragedy began about an hour before the match was due to begin, when supporters in a Juventus stand began climbing over the wall after fans in a neighbouring and overcrowded Liverpool stand began to spread out. Missiles were thrown in the air. We went to investigate the cause of the trouble. Suddenly there was an almighty crash of masonry about 6 feet from where we stood. In that instant, many people must have been crushed to death. It took a few moments for people to realise what had happened, and amazingly it took many minutes for the medical services to move in. Instead, in an astonishing display of insensitivity, the authorities deployed armed riot police. Elsewhere in the ground, bemused supporters weren't sure how to react. Some reacted badly. Many seriously hurt people were wandering about unnoticed. At least 36 dead, around 250 injured. The European Cup final at Hazel Stadium on May the 29th, 1985, will always be engraved on the minds of sporting and non-sporting people alike as a disaster.
The annual conference of the Social Credit Party in mid-May endorsed the leadership of Bruce Beetham for a further term and approved a name change. The party is now known as the New Zealand Democratic Party. In early June, Mr. Joe Walding, New Zealand's High Commissioner in London, died. Walding had been our ambassador for only 4 months. He was buried in his hometown and old electorate, Palmerston North.
We come here today to bear up his family in love because we have that for them. We commend him to his rest and we commit his body to be buried. But oh, the joy of having known him and the fact that we are at this time of sorrow able to go back into all the great things about his life and his achievements.
During May and June, long queues lined up at the Auckland Art Gallery to view an exhibition of paintings by the French Impressionist Claude Monet. It attracted tens of thousands of people, not only from Auckland, but from all over the country. The collection of paintings, worth some $80 million, was a first for this country. 1986 will see a similar display in Auckland, this time by Italian artist Canaletto. The dollar float and Labour economic package provided some surprises in '85. Economist Rufus Daw comments.
I think you've got to put the financial sector first. In the last 18 months, we've had the most significant changes in the entire financial history of New Zealand. We've gone from the Western world's most controlled financial system to the world's least controlled financial system. We get the removal of interest rate controls, ratio controls, lending controls. We're getting removal of entry into the industry with new banking licenses. So I think these are quite dramatic. In anybody's language, they are quite sensational.
What factors do you think will have a major influence on the economy next year?
I think the government's moves, particularly first getting their budget under control, deficit under control, controlling monetary policy. This is very significant. Their taxation changes, particularly in the introduction of GST, which is going to break the kind of deadlock which always existed in government financing because of the inability of the tax base from income tax to be increased fast enough for government's needs. And the float, of course, of the New Zealand dollar, which to everybody's intense surprise actually floated upwards instead of downwards.
How significant has that high dollar been?
Well, it's significant for industry in the sense that it makes exporting very difficult. And quite clearly, if it stays at that rate, and all the indications I think are that it won't, then industry in a lot of difficulty. But it's a two-sided problem. Obviously, the exports are becoming rather difficult to move, but importing, of course, is a lot cheaper, and this affects our cost structure. So it's gain and loss, I think, in that area, but it certainly is significant. I think it means that New Zealand's really joined the world economy. We've been in an isolated protectionist state for so long that it quite surprises people to know that we have to live in a real world economy. And this happened, I think, with the removal of exchange controls last November, which disappeared after 50 years. I don't think anybody's actually missed them.
It's June the 8th, and National takes the once-safe Labour seat in the Timaru by-election.
National's Maurice McTeague emerged in triumph with an even bigger majority than he expected.
This is a tremendous night for me, undoubtedly, but it's an even more tremendous night for Timaru.
If we did them in Timaru tonight, I give notice. Look out! 1987, National is on the road again.
I think that it was probably a judgment of government policies. People were very nervous about the trend that was developing under Roger Douglas's financial management, and it was that disquiet that showed through.
Labour's Jan Walker may have missed out on Timaru, but 1985 saw some notable firsts for New Zealand women. Mary O'Regan was the first woman appointed to head a government department with the establishment of the Ministry of Women. In other areas, women continued to break new ground. 2 women made aviation history in April when they piloted a scheduled passenger flight. In July, the Anglican Diocese of Waikato was the first in the world to approve women bishops. Carol Rankin broke into one of the last male bastions in Parliament when she became the new Sergeant of Arms, and Sue Suckling became New Zealand's first businesswoman of the year. 1985 saw the end of the United Nations Decade for Women. New Zealand sent 13 delegates to an international conference in Nairobi, while in Wellington, Dame Miriam Dole reviewed progress made during the decade.
The most important thing is that there's a much greater awareness by women themselves and all members of the public of the issues which do concern women. I think this is probably the biggest change.
Meanwhile, New Zealand women writers made their mark in 1985. In New Zealand, they took the top 3 placings in the Watties Book Awards. And Kerry Hume collected the prestigious Booker Prize for her novel, The Bone People. Kerry Hume was officially welcomed home at a ceremony in the Beehive in early December.
Thank everybody very much indeed. I'm sorry I'm more articulate on a typewriter than I am with a microphone. To everybody, thank you very much from my heart. Kia ora koutou katoa.
The 1985 telethon at the end of June raised more than $6 million for the Child and Youth Development Trust. The New Zealand Party's annual conference went ahead in August, despite controversy over the leadership and direction of the party. Mr. John Galvin, a Matamata farmer, emerged as the new leader.
The fact that I'd had no previous political involvement means nothing apart from the fact that there wasn't a political party until the birth of this party that reflected my own personal philosophy.
Do you think you'll be able to pull the party together in time for the next election?
Oh, for sure. Look, it's a team effort now. I'm the leader, sure, but behind me I have a great team of people, a new president and a largely new council. They're all determined to get on with the job, and we'll do it for sure.
1985 was a bad year for natural disasters. This report from an American network.
Volcanoes, floods, earthquakes, mudslides, and fires. In Colombia, a volcano erupted during the night, sending a 150-foot high wall of mud through the valley, wiping out the town of Armero, population 28,000. Survivors were being pulled from the mud for more than a week. Every day, there were hundreds of dramatic rescues. Afterwards, there were thousands of mud-scarred youngsters and a death toll of more than 25,000. During the year, there were 10 major earthquakes, but none more devastating than the one that struck Mexico City. In a matter of moments, 8,000 killed, 10,000 buildings destroyed, and 150,000 homeless.
No se preocupen!
For a few, a heartwarming story of survival. For nearly 2 weeks, searchers found youngsters buried alive in the rubble of this hospital. And earthquake experts hope they soon will be able to prevent some of the devastation.
We have made great strides in moving towards being able to predict earthquakes, but as of right now, we cannot precisely predict earthquakes.
But there is little that can be done in countries like Bangladesh when a tidal wave moves across lowland coastal areas. This year, one storm killed 15,000 and left 200,000 homeless. In northern Italy, a dam burst, sending a wall of water and mud through small villages. And hundreds were killed in Puerto Rico when a mudslide buried a shantytown following 3 days of rains. The mudslide left twisted shapes of tin roofs and corrugated buildings in a heap at the bottom of the mountain.
On Sunday, July 7th, a former British fisheries research vessel sailed into Auckland Harbour and into a prominent place in the histories of New Zealand, France and the international environmental group Greenpeace. 3 nights later, the Rainbow Warrior was sunk, holed by explosives in a terrorist attack by the French Secret Service, their aim to prevent her from leading the annual anti-nuclear protest fleet to Mururoa. Dawn on July 11th brought the start of a $3 million police investigation extending around the world, an investigation that would lead eventually to the laying of charges against 5 French agents. Charges of conspiracy to commit arson, willful damage of the Rainbow Warrior, and the murder of crewman Fernando Pereira. as the Rainbow Warrior sat slumped alongside Marsden Wharf. It would lead also to international embarrassment for the French government, a severe rift between New Zealand and France, and eventually the resignation of the French Defence Minister and the Chief of the Secret Service. Key items of evidence in the investigation were a Zodiac inflatable dinghy and an outboard motor, and a Newman's camper van hired by two of the French agents under false names. In reality, the so-called Touranges were Captain Dominique Prieur and Major Alain Maffard, and theirs were to be the only arrests. Other French agents on board the charter yacht Ouvea were able to scuttle the yacht and return to France without being apprehended. When they appeared in court, Maffard and Prieur were the object of unprecedented security, the object too of unprecedented interest from international news media. A lower court hearing scheduled for 6 weeks was cut to less than an hour by plea bargaining. The Crown agreed to reduce the murder charges to manslaughter. The French agents agreed to plead guilty. Sentencing the pair, New Zealand's Chief Justice Sir Ronald Davison gave what he described as a clear warning to them and their masters that terrorist-type activities would be met with severe punishment. For Prieur and her co-accused, the sentences were 10 years on the manslaughter charges, 7 years for willful damage, the terms to be served concurrently. The sentence for the Rainbow Warrior was to be re-sunk, this time with the backing of Greenpeace, this time for divers. In dry dock at Devonport, an inspection of the vessel revealed that the damage caused by the two explosions was too great to consider repair. The sabotage of the Rainbow Warrior had been a severe blow for Greenpeace, but if its object was to diminish the impact of the organisation, it failed in the extreme. Crippled itself, the Rainbow Warrior gave new life and especially new publicity to the rest of the protest fleet, a fleet that despite several other problems still made it to Mururoa, led by replacement flagship Greenpeace. But for all the attention it received, the protest was, as in the past, unsuccessful. If French President François Mitterrand was at all personally embarrassed by the Rainbow Warrior bombing, he wasn't embarrassed enough to cancel a visit to the atoll, to declare by his mere presence there that whatever the strength of international opinion, the testing will continue.
For the police in 1985, the length of the Greenpeace investigation highlighted their concern over staff shortages.
There's no question of the fact that they should be increased. We've been asking for years for our numbers to be increased, and this authorised strength, I think the term is, that keeps getting bandied around, that is a misnomer, because it suggests that it's some magical means of protecting the public, whereas it's not. It's the authorised strength that was set in 1976, and that in itself is inadequate. And that's really got to be looked at as a matter of urgency by the government.
The Minister's reply was straight to the point, and the problem remains for 1986.
But frankly, I can't deliver everything at once, and that is the blunt fact of life.
She went on to say that in practice, there was no possibility of any more staff being trained anyway. She said the police college was already full with the extra 200 trainees to compensate for policemen who'd taken up the early retirement option.
At the National Party conference in July, a major row erupted over the state of the party's finances.
The row broke out when Dr. Shearer tried to raise a point of order about a story in the Sunday News. It alleges that a South Island MP has been loaned money from party funds, and that although that loan has since been repaid, it was made secretly.
I'll have to interrupt
It then proceeds,
Dr.
Madam
Shearer.
President, to
Dr.
outline
Shearer.
certain matters which you know I have queried you
I'm
about
calling you to
on
order,
a number
Dr.
of
Shearer.
occasions.
Dr.
Allegations that something... Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up.
At this point, Dr. Shearer's microphone was turned off, but he only
Dr.
returned to
Shearer,
his seat
as
after the
long as
party
I am
president,
president
Mrs.
of
Sue
this
Wood,
national
indicated
party,
the matter could be
I
raised
chair the
tomorrow in
national
general
conference of
business.
the party,
Dr.
and
Shearer
I
says he's
ask
been
for the
concerned about the alleged
cooperation
loan
of
for
the
some
party.
time. It was behind his bid for the party presidency earlier this year, and he raised it today because he's dissatisfied with the answers he's been getting.
You were expelled for asking those questions. Yes. You've been reinstated. Yes. You've been given the offer of raising those allegations again. Does this mean that you consider yourself vindicated?
I think there's a very large measure of vindication in